Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 43, Atheopaganism, with our guest via Skype, Mark Green. Hey Mark, welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Thanks for having me on.
So, for those who don't know you, could you say who you are and a bit about what you do and your spiritual path?
Sure. I am the moderator and editor of the Atheopaganism blog, which is a blog for people who are following a pagan spiritual path without believing in the supernatural, without believing in gods or spirits or magic or any of those kinds of things. So our cosmology is based in science, but we perform rituals, we do seasonal observances, all that kind of stuff that pagans ordinarily do.
I think some pagans some people from any religion would probably be like, how's that work? How do you have a spiritual life without believing in God or the supernatural?
I actually look at it the other way around. I think that it's kind of an accident of history that people now believe in supernatural things as explanations for phenomena that happen in the universe. I think that if we were just starting human culture today with what we know scientifically, we wouldn't ever make that leap. We would assume that what there was virtually related to was the physical material cosmos in all of its wonder, and that it doesn't have to have a personality or self-awareness or to be communicative or any of that in order to inspire us and to be worthy of our awe and our wonder.
So, there's people like Richard Dawkins and all that, and, they're very militantly, I guess, anti-religion. And where does Atheopaganism fall in that line? Because, there are people that, who believe in a deity and the supernatural, but also believe in science as well, and believe in the wonders of science.
Well, okay. As I understand it, that's kind of two questions, so I'll try to answer them one at a time. There is a subsection of the atheist community which some social researchers on atheism in America have termed the anti-theists. Mm-hmm. And those are people like Richard Dawkins who are very strident in their opposition to religion generally. I think that those people have completely missed the boat about what religion is. They have assumed that religion means you have to believe in something supernatural. And there's no reason why that has to be true. I have a religion, I practice my religion, and I don't believe in anything supernatural at all. Religion is not just what you believe, it's also what you value, and it's what you do in observance of that religion in terms of practices and rituals and so forth. So it is entirely possible to conduct the practices of religion in a way that is it contributes to your life. It's life enriching, it increases happiness without necessarily having to believe in anything supernatural. I don't think that people like Richard Dawkins are really helping the cause of atheism much at all. They may be encouraging people who are already atheists to come out of the closet, which I guess is a good thing, but their express purpose is to try to convince people not to be religious, but instead to be atheistic. And that's a complete loser. There's no way you can tell people that are getting deep personal fulfillment out of their experience of a religion that they shouldn't practice that religion because it's not consistent with science. It's kind of like telling people they shouldn't eat chocolate because it's an unappealing color. That's not why people practice their religion, is to be correct relative to science. They practice it because it helps them build community. It helps them feel their life has more meaning. It gives them more of a sense of purpose in their lives, a sense of place in the universe, all of those kinds of things. And just being an atheist scientist alone will not do all those things. They generally won't. Mm-hmm. So let me answer your other question, which has more to do with how there are people who believe in supernatural phenomena and yet say that they also believe in science. My answer to that is that they're cherry picking. If you're really going to subscribe to the scientific method, you have to be willing to subscribe to the scientific method in relation to all phenomena in the universe. And that means that if there's not enough evidence out there to support the existence of something, you shouldn't believe in it until there is. Now, having a scientific approach means I will never be 100% certain about anything because science is always open to new evidence and new information. But until that evidence or information comes along that indicates to me that there is such a thing as a disembodied intelligence or a spirit without a body that can communicate, or a god or something like that, or can at least point to some phenomenon in the universe for which a god is a good explanation, then I'm not going to believe in them.
Mm-hmm.
Did that make sense?
Yeah. Well, it makes sense to me because, at least in my particular tradition, which is Wicca, and I'm Wiccan Christian, so there's a mix of things here. But, in a lot of traditions, there's kind of the craft of the religion in addition to the spiritual, the supernatural aspect of the religion. So for me, I do make a difference between the actual craft part and my own belief in the supernatural aspect of it. And, that's so, what you're saying about, the community and the ritual makes a lot of sense to me.
Right. Religion is not just what you believe, and that I think is part of the mistake that the likes of Richard Dawkins are making. In fact, for people who are religious, what they believe is typically of much less importance in their lives than what they do. What they do is very important in their lives because it brings community with them. It helps them to feel like part of something larger. It gives them all of those benefits. And practicing Atheopaganism is doing exactly that for me, even though, when I'm working with my altar, for example, I don't believe that I am physically affecting the universe by moving symbolically meaningful objects around on my altar and lighting candles and incense and that kind of stuff. But it still fills me with a feeling of well-being and a feeling of being on a path that's meaningful to me. So, yes, I think that calling that the craft of the religion is one way to talk about it. The traditional terms that have been used in Christianity are the dogma and the praxis.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two kind of poles of what religious activity is. And I think that there's been kind of a mistake on the part of the activist atheists by harping about beliefs, about the dogma, when what is really most important to people is what they do in religions, what holidays they celebrate and how they celebrate them, what their rituals are, and the community that builds around them.
Absolutely. In many religions, there are people who are atheist and whatever religion they are, because, I've met atheist Christians, I've met atheist Buddhists, and there are atheist Muslims out there. So it's not a new thing. And it just seems like people kind of get like, oh my God, this is shocking, when people come up with that. But it's like, no, this has been going on for a long time.
Sure it has. Sure it has. I mean, if you go to any church congregation, or maybe any but the most fanatical fundamentalist church congregations in this country, you will find people that go to church on Sunday because it's what their family has always done, and they aren't necessarily believers, but help plug into their local community. It's part of what's expected of them as respected members of the community. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think that there are a lot of atheists out there who are kind of pretending to believe. I think the one difference for Atheopagans is that we're not pretending to believe. We are following a pagan path in that it honors the earth, sees the earth as sacred, sees everything as connected, practices a wheel of the year, all those kinds of things. meets in ritual circles rather than in kind of audience and presenter congregation style rituals. But we're also really clear that what we're doing is for ourselves. It's for our own edification and the enrichment of our lives and to be happier and better people, rather than to serve some supernatural entity or to communicate with those entities or to try to affect some kind of physical magic in the world.
Do you get a lot of flack from other pagans about your atheopaganism?
There, as with the atheist community, where there's that slice that the studies have called anti-theists, which incidentally only make up about 14.5% of atheists. They're just the loudest ones. So people tend to associate atheism with that very strident kind of anti-religious kind of talk. Similarly, in the pagan community, there is a small but vocal group of people for whom literal belief in gods is absolutely required. And as far as they're concerned, we're not pagans because we don't believe in gods. And the irony there is that they're perfectly okay with someone believing in, say, one set of gods and not believing in another set of gods. So there's really a disconnect there. If you've got a Hellenic Reconstructionist pagan who believes in the Greek gods, but doesn't believe in the Norse gods, that person is every bit as much God denying as I am. But for those people who feel that we must acknowledge, the existence of these gods, they're unhappy about us too. But the good news is that the pagan community generally is a big tent. It has lots of diversity within it. And as far as we're concerned, honoring the earth as sacred and practicing rituals that embody and enact that understanding of the world is very central. It's a central pillar of paganism, and it is not found in the other religions that we see around us particularly. Mm-hmm. The orientation is very unique and specific to paganism, and so we're pagans.
So,
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Your podcast is really pretty germane to exactly what we're about, because even though it isn't that we intend to be viewed as heretics, there are those in the atheist community that view us as sellouts and flakes because we're doing these rituals and so forth. And then there are people in the pagan community who consider us to be not belonging to the pagan community because we don't believe in the supernatural. So we kind of get it from both sides.
Oh, and I totally understand that, being Wiccan Christian, it's, I totally understand that, being in that position. But, you're right. I really espouse a lot about radical inclusion. And I think that, if you can go through your spiritual practice, however that may be, and be like, hey, if you believe in God, that's okay. Go with your bad self, or if you don't believe in God, go with your bad self, then, I think that's a way to go. There's just too many ways to believe in the world for any one particular way to be the absolute.
Sure. And there are too many divisions between all of us anyway. Those that want to draw hard lines and say you can't belong because our clubhouse only contains these people, they're really kind of hurting themselves in a way. We have people on the Atheopaganism Facebook group who believe in gods, but they find what we're doing very interesting. And so they participate in the discussion and they're respectful, and that's great. I just did a poll of the Atheopagan Facebook group, and it's split just about up the middle. About half are atheists who are interested in the idea of a non-supernatural religion, a non-believer's religion. And the other half are pagans who don't literally believe in gods or magic or the supernatural. So then we also have about 10% of the participants in the Facebook group who are pagans who do believe in gods or the supernatural, but who are interested in what we're doing. And so, as far as I'm concerned, as long as everyone plays well together, everybody is welcome. It's only when people start insulting one another or telling one another that they shouldn't believe what they do that I step in as a moderator and start trying to clean things up.
Well, I think that's the biggest problem that we have in the pagan community and other progressive groups, and I've actually talked a lot about this before in um, other interviews. You know, it's just that we tend to eat our own a lot. We tend to be like, no, you can't be a true blah if you're not blah, and you know, and I've written again like recently about this, and you know, why do you think we seem to get stuck on that kind of idea of you can't be a true X if you're not Y?
Well, I think there are a number of factors, and some of them are shared between the atheist community and the pagan community in that they're both minorities. And minority positions tend to be defensive and they tend to take offense really quickly.
Mm.
So I think that is part of it, is that people are accustomed to their beliefs not being respected. And so they tend to be a little bit hair trigger about responding to other beliefs that they think are insulting theirs. One of the things that people have a really hard time with this idea of, I mean, I think that it's fine that other atheists don't want to necessarily have a ritual and spiritual practice in their life. If they don't feel a need for that, terrific. But the University of Tennessee study that kind of analyzed the different motivations of atheists throughout the United States showed that something like 18% of, I think it was 18%, of the atheist community are what they call ritual atheists, who are looking for something that's sort of a religion replacement that doesn't include belief in gods and the supernatural. That's my constituency as far as I'm concerned. Those are the folks that I'm working to provide atheopaganism to as an option if they choose to pursue it. But it doesn't bother me that there are all these other atheists out there who they don't want it, they don't need it, they're not interested. I'm fine with that. Similarly, in the pagan community, I think what you see is a lot of people that have never quite fit in mainstream society, and they tend to be quite defensive about their uniqueness and can also have kind of limited conflict resolution skills. The pagan community has been kind of notorious for the witch wars and for people getting just really, really flaming in their criticism of one another. And I think that some of that is because of people kind of having lived on the fringe and not having necessarily developed ways of getting along with large groups of people. I mean, I've been in the pagan community for nearly 30 years, and I've seen a lot of this happen. And I spent more than 20 of those years basically just pretending to believe, even though I didn't, because it was enriching my life in so many ways. That got to the point where I couldn't quite take it anymore. When I started having people around me explain inappropriate behavior as the will of the gods, that was when I had to step back and say, wait a minute, I can't. I need to be clear that I'm not subscribing to that kind of thinking. And the thinking that led to the creation of Atheopaganism.
Well, I think that goes to a greater problem of not taking personal responsibility for your actions. Because, you know, I've seen other pagans and, you know, and I do believe in deity, but I've seen other pagans do the exact same thing. And I don't think, you know, I think that's kind of you know, that could be a whole nother interview in itself, I think.
It very much could.
And, you know, and I've talked a lot about personal responsibility as a priest and clergy before as well, where, you know, we have to realize who we're talking with and who we're in circle with, and and be respectful of other people's belief systems. And I think that's true in all the cases, because like I know when I do public ritual, I have to remember that not everybody's going to believe the exact same way that I do. Like even in this interview, I know I'm a biochemist, so I disagree with you a little bit about the science thing. But you know what? That's okay, because we're allowed to disagree on these things.
Yes. Yes. I mean, that's part of the nature of human autonomy, is that we all get to decide what we're going to believe and what we're going to do. And and that's central to the fact that we have this diversity of positions. I do think that there is one factor in the insistence of certain people that everyone should believe the way that they do, that comes from the monotheisms. I don't think that was as big of a factor prior to the rise of the big monotheisms, where belief became this absolute litmus test of whether or not you were truly a member of that religion. You had to say, if you were Catholic, you had to speak the credo, I believe, da 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 da. And Judaism and Islam have similar kinds of statements. Whereas I think in a polytheistic society, it was probably less important that you necessarily believed as that you acted as though you believed, in accordance with the way the rest of your culture works.
Well, I think the definition of belief is widening now too, because we have the internet now, and a lot of the rise of what a lot of people call the nuns, or spiritual but not religious. And I think, with Atheopaganism, with people doing spiritual work at home, or going to church for community, that kind of thing, I think we're seeing kind of a widening of our spiritual culture as a society. Maybe,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're probably familiar with the Sunday Assembly.
Actually, no.
Okay. The Sunday Assembly is it's like church without the religion. It started in London. Two comedians rented out a hall, and basically it's kind of like a church service. There's lots in there's someone who gives a speech about something that's meaningful and that kind of thing. It just doesn't have any religion associated with it at all. And it took off so much that now it's become an international phenomenon, and there are Sunday assemblies in major cities all over the world. So I do think that this recognition that we're in an era when more people are becoming less credulous in gods, but that they still have all these spiritual needs, is really starting to be felt. We're seeing responses to that in a lot of different ways. I think Atheopaganism is one. And I should mention, I'm not the first person ever to put atheism and paganism together. There's a great blog called Humanistic Paganism, where people write about a naturalistic view of the universe, combined with pagan ritual observance and practice. I was at the pagan conference Pantheacon earlier this year in February, and got to meet a number of people that write for non-theistic pagan outlets online. And this appears to be something that's really on the move. There seems to be more and more people that are interested in a pagan practice, but not necessarily believing in gods. So I think it's an interesting phenomenon that's happening right now.
Absolutely. Actually, even my wife, she believes in spirits, but not necessarily gods as gods. So it's interesting, because we did talk before about how the Atheopaganism thing runs a gamut, and it's more of a spectrum than just one thing or the other. And I think that's what people don't understand, is that they hear a label and they expect it to be just one thing. And I think you're right. I think it's kind of a holdover from the larger religions, that you have to do one path, one thing. to be right.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, those bearded patriarchs back there, they did an awful lot of laying down of rules. They
Mm-hmm.
were, especially in the Old Testament, man, they were really, really about rules. And we live in an era now when the kinds of rules that we need are different rules, for one thing, most of them. And the way that we need to figure out rules is more figuring them out for ourselves rather than having them handed down to us. I mean, obviously, you know, you shouldn't kill people is a pretty universal rule that we ought to keep. But a lot of the other rules about what to eat and how to behave and so forth, those are personal calls that people have to figure out on their own, or that they can be helped by a spiritual path to find. And I think having more flexibility now in the kinds of spiritual paths that are allowable is a healthy thing for our society going forward. Unfortunately, we're getting a lot of backlash from the evangelical right, but I kind of look at that as sort of the last gasp in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Their numbers are falling. Their degree of credibility with the public at large is falling. And I sort of see it as like this animal backed into a corner. I think that given another generation of the internet, we will not be seeing evangelical Christianity have the kind of power that it's had in our society for the past 30 years.
I agree because, I see, especially in the younger generations, millennials and younger, it's more of like, oh, you practice XYZ. Great. Wonderful. And there's no real backlash from them. So
Right.
I think you're right. I think in, 10, 15 years, maybe 20 years, we're really going to see a very big shift in the way religion is in our society.
I think so. I think we're seeing it now, but we're just seeing kind of the beginning of the bell curve. I think it's going to snowball from here on out. And unfortunately, I expect that the radical right is going to get that much more hysterical as it loses control. Certainly, the things that they're doing on women's health, the things that they're doing on gay rights are just more and more and more out of touch with reality, out of touch with what the general public wants, less and less palatable to people that are growing up now. So it's kind of a scary time. We just have to hope that those guys do not get another chance to be in charge for a while, because they'll do a lot of damage.
I will cross my fingers on that one. I hope you're right. And, I have a lot of, for me personally, I have a lot of faith in the younger generation to really spur that along. Because there's just much more, it seems like there's much more cooperation on all things like class and race and, women's issues, queer issues in the younger generation than there is with the older generation. Not to say that there's not extremes in either camp, because, there are young evangelicals, but they seem to be shrinking every year.
My understanding is that the current mathematics on evangelical replacement, meaning if you've got an evangelical couple, how many children would they have to have in order to replace themselves in the community after they die? They would have to have 6 children in order to have 2 of them stay in the evangelical church. The other 4 will leave. So these variables become necessary in order for the evangelical population to stay the same size. And most evangelical families are not having that many children.
Right. And, I've told quite a few people that I think that as a society, we're in a transition time. I like to call it that, we're moving out of our bratty teenager stage.
I hope so.
I really do too. And so, it's a really interesting time to observe, I think.
Unfortunately, the context is so harrowing with climate change and some of the other major challenges that are facing humanity. The question is whether we have enough time to actually get to a point where we're on the other side of this transition and we're able to live in a more healthy way. I try to be optimistic about that. In my career, I work in environmental protection. So, um, obviously, I believe that that can do some good, but it's still it's still scary times. And the longer we find ourselves monkeying around with these crazy ideas of controlling people in their bedrooms and making people that are dark skinned, of a lower class with less opportunity and hating the poor and all the various things that the Republican Party is trying to sell us right now, the less we're able to the less we're able to do on some of those larger issues. Hopefully, we'll have enough time after this spate of tantrum throwing by the mindset that is fading away, that we'll be able to address these larger questions like climate change and energy and water supply and many of the things that are really becoming a crisis in the world.
Well, I hope so too, because, there's the survival of the human race as a whole at stake here. And, we're fighting about things that, we really should have moved away from a long time ago.
Yes, we're refighting issues that seem to be resolved, like abortion and contraception. I mean, contraception, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That was 50 years ago. And now these guys want to relitigate that. It's just nuts. It's just nuts. And I could go on for hours about how nuts it is, but the main point is that I'm hoping that we're able to move beyond the crazy that's being promoted right now relatively quickly, so we can get to work on the real stuff that we need to do.
Absolutely. How much is your spiritual practice, your pagan practice, a part of the work that you do? Because a lot of pagans talk about how, their spiritual practice is part of their activism practice, but then there's also a group that are like, they're separate.
Well, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, as I said, I've been in the pagan community for 27 years, and that's pretty much the length of my career. So it's kind of hard for me to separate one from the other. I mean, I've been practicing observances and maintaining an altar, which I actually call a focus because I think the word altar implies worship, but that's a small point.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been maintaining an altar and doing rituals, both solitary and with groups. I'm a part of a magical or a ritual circle that's been together now for 23 years. So I think I see my career as one of the implementations of my spiritual values. But I don't necessarily see going to work as a part of my spiritual work. I see that as something that I do separately in a different modality than my professional modality.
Where do you see Atheopaganism going in the future? Are you seeing a number of younger people coming into Atheopaganism? Are you seeing it grow more in the pagan community?
Okay. Yes, I'm seeing more of it happening, and not necessarily calling itself Atheopaganism. Sometimes it's calling itself humanistic paganism or naturalistic paganism. There's an organization called the Naturalistic Spirituality Society. There are a variety of different manifestations within the pagan community of people that are saying we're non-believers or we're agnostics, but we're still doing this because it's meaningful to us. And I do see that growing, but I'm not sure how much of that growth is new people coming into it and how much of it is people that have always been non-believers but were quiet about it before coming forward. There is a process of coming out of the closet because there's some risk. I mean, one of the first things that happened after I launched the Atheopagan Facebook group about a year ago, and it started to get some visibility, and people started to see the writing on the blog and so forth. One of the early things that happened was that somebody blasted Atheist Pagans on in a column on the Wild Hunt. So actually, no, it wasn't on the Wild Hunt. It was on a different blog. But
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, you do get some pushback, and so it's understandable why some people stay in the closet. But I think fewer of them are doing that now. Um, Atheopaganism, the flavor of it that I've created is relatively new. The essay that I wrote that kind of lays out all the ideas about why I am an atheist pagan and what that means to me and how I practice it was only written 5 years ago, and it only really got visible on the web about a year ago. So in that time, the Facebook group has grown now to about 350 people in about 10 months. And the traffic on the blog has been steadily increasing. Excuse me. So yes, I mean, I'm getting more requests for people to join the Facebook group and join the conversation all the time. People from all over the world. I've got people from South Africa and Australia and Great Britain and Belgium and Switzerland, and so that's one of the cool things. That I do believe that the younger generation is going to have the same kind of spiritual hungers that people have always had, and they're much less likely to be believers in the supernatural. That's just with the growth of the nuns, I think we're seeing that more.
That's cool. And I always find it really amazing when, something takes off like that, because, I've seen that with my own ministry of this podcast that, it's really interesting when suddenly you see people reading your stuff and looking at your stuff, and it's like, oh wow, maybe we've hit on something here. Maybe we're filling a need that, people didn't really recognize until recently.
There has definitely been, and I have been amazed at how rapidly the Facebook group grew from, a tiny handful of my friends to include lots of people out of the atheist community, lots of people that had been participating in conversations about atheism and spirituality in other contexts from all over the country. And one of the things that's great about this group is that we have really good conversations in a very civil way. Internet conversations can so often fall into an unpleasant tone, and we really haven't done that at all. It's all been very positive. So, so I'm encouraged by that, and encouraged to welcome people to come aboard to something that they think might be for them or interest them, to come in and have conversations with the people that are there.
Well, we're just about out of time. So we've talked about your Facebook group. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Great.
How else can people talk to you, get in touch with you, or learn more about Atheopaganism?
Okay. The best way is to go to the Atheopagan blog, and that's atheopaganism.wordpress.com. I'm sorry, Atheopaganism, which is AtheoPaganism.wordpress.com. So that's where all the writing and so forth. There's close to 70 posts on there now. And there's all kinds of resources. There's an Atheopagan hymnal. There's a ritual primer. There's writing about the principles. There's all kinds of stuff there. So, and there's a contact form there, which will contact me. So if people want to get in touch with me, then they can use the contact form there on the blog, and that'll shoot me an email, and I will become aware of them.
Oh, excellent. And I'm going to take a peek at the hymnal there, because that's pretty fascinating, and I like music, so I will definitely scout that out. So are you going to be at Pantheacon again? Because I know you had some space in, I know there was some Atheopagan space in a suite. Are you Are you or other people planning to have that again next year?
Absolutely. Yes. In fact, our hope, if we can raise enough money to do it, is to have our own hospitality suite next year.
Excellent.
The Pagan Scholars Den was very generous in welcoming us to share their space. And we did a workshop and a ritual and a panel discussion about atheism and paganism there, as well as an open house mixer where people could eat and talk with one another and so forth. Those were all very successful events. And in fact, the suite was so full that there were people out in the hall that ended up being discouraged and ended up leaving. So we're hoping that Pantheacon will accept some of our events as program events, as well as to have our own hospitality suite next year.
Well, excellent. I look forward to at least attempting to get to the suite if you do have it. Last year, I wasn't able to get to very many. So, Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it. Okay, take care, Gina.
I'd like to thank Mark for joining us this week. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. You can support This Week in Heresy by subscribing to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, following us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast, or financially through Patreon. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.